All right, and we're good to go.
Good brain.
Yeah, I'll adjust if need be.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah. So yeah, this was just something we built inside. Maybe it'll be bigger someday. Anyway, so I want to thank everybody for inviting me, especially Micah and Puppet Labs and everybody. I think this is really great. And a little bit about myself, really quick. My name is Andrew Koklo. I'm graduated a designer, basically. At multimedia school stuff. Actually, Mark, who's in the back, we went through the same programs at U of O. And been doing this for about 10 years. All the front end sort of stuff I just kind of loved, and so that's where I ended up kind of bridging that gap between design and like front end development and user experience and stuff. The really important piece of information here is that there's 299 people who I don't even hardly use Google+, so I don't know what they're looking for there.
You're 302 now, actually.
Do I?
Yeah.
Whoa. I don't know what. Yeah, think about that. Maybe I'll post some stuff or something. Anyway, so we're going to talk about object-oriented CSS, which is, in my opinion, an amazing kind of idea shift in like how we address front-end sort of solutions and problems and stuff like that. So I'm going to talk about why you should care about this, why it matters, and why I care about it. And then I'm going to talk about also like a little bit of backstory, where we came from, some of the advances that have made. Obviously preprocessors are a big part of that, advances in this area. Talk about some of the common problems and solutions that this sort of way of thinking lets you do, and it deals with problems of naming stuff. I'm going to give you an overview of the kind of three basic approaches to object-oriented CSS and stuff that are out there currently. And then I'll talk about our approach, which is kind of a hybrid of these three. And we take the best of each and leave with whatever we don't really feel is worthwhile. And then some details about how, if you go to implement this, things we've run into, challenges we've had, common problems, or like, oh, we better not do that blows stuff up or whatever. And then some really cool stuff that you can expect if you choose to try to implement this approach. So these are the things that this framework and this approach to stuff, this object-oriented approach, solves for me. And this is big time. I want to solve user problems once as a designer. I come up and I design a solution for whatever it happens to be, and I kind of want to design that solution one time and then maybe iterate over it and like make it better as it goes, but I don't want to have to rebuild it every single time. Like the user needs to log in, well, start from blank slate and do all this sort of stuff. If you have a good solution, stick with it. Design consistency. If you've got like a bunch of applications that you do in-house, like obviously you want the experience of logging into different portions of your application or whatever it is to be similar. That's something you can look for. Less of this challenge with CSS of like, I don't know what to call this stuff. There's no real rules to it. You just make up your own, and this is a good system for that. And then this is the other like problem that you run into with naming things. You name something, there's conflicting stuff when you have a lot of developers working together, and no real accepted idea of what we're going to call stuff and how that's going to pan out. And and then another like key thing that I look for on the front end is trying to write code that I can understand. Like in other people's code, you can pull it, you pull it down and start working on it. You have an idea of what it's supposed to do by the names and like the structure. It's not a mystery meat sort of try and like re-engineer what their brain process went through or whatever. And then this is a huge thing. I don't know how many people do this currently, but in my experience, I did not spend a great deal of time refactoring CSS in the past. I mean, did it when I could, but it was usually like you had a huge massive file, and you felt like I just scrap this and I'll just rewrite it from scratch because that'd be easier. So this is another like big gain of this approach. And then the last thing is kind of like a nice handy thing to have. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the psychological process flow, but there's a TED talk about it. It's just like being able to focus on specific items, specific components, and being more efficient at like fixing those problems rather than a giant monolithic software thing and getting distracted by all that stuff. For me, having a way to focus on the things that I want to build is really core to being productive and coming up with good solutions. So anyway, let's go back and talk really quickly. I'm gonna blaze through some of this stuff because you know what CSS is. But I'm gonna go through the history really quick. So at the beginning we had HTML, right? And that's where at one point there was no CSS. The design and the layout stuff was on the tags, and that was way back in the day. And what, 15 years now or something. But so we've made some huge advances from that as CSS was created, and people started separating the content and the sort of structure with CSS. They're still definitely related, but they're controlled by different languages. And then we've made a huge leap, I think, with preprocessors, and this is like as big as these sort of jumps. And when you use Sass and some of these things, some of the power and the stuff that it allows you to do is incredible, I think, and a huge advance in front-end stuff. So the typical approach used to be you would start out by laying out sort of your tags, maybe at the head of a big CSS file or something like that. This is the base of my document. Then you'd start to get into layout stuff. You'd name things. Now, of course, with HTML5, there's actual tags for this sort of stuff. And then you'd have this sort of specific stuff that you built as you went along developing applications. And I used to really pride myself on these sort of I didn't use any classes or IDs or something, and I got this crazy thing selected somewhere down in the bowels of the DOM. And I would strive for that. I'm just going to use one class name and then do this whole application, right? And so this was kind of the previous way of doing things. You did a lot of that sort of stuff. And then if you work in a team that works at any decent pace, this sort of thing happens all the time, where it's like something's broken on a page. You know what? Screw it. I'll just put some weird class name on there, and I'll just fix that one little thing here. And then, what I was talking about before, refactoring, you come back, this is, nobody knows what that means. Blue paragraph 15 or whatever. That's not ideal. And then again, back to this problem, this right here is brittle. If you change the HTML of your stuff, which is what happens now a lot, this sort of super chain stuff breaks. So this is some garbage from my own website, which is always a couple stages behind whatever I happen to be currently doing. It's challenge to keep up with that stuff. But this, you can see, I had a strategy. I started out with tags, and then I had sort of some comments that kind of break things up and organize stuff, and blah blah blah. Standard sort of giant CSS file. Try to get things organized and that sort of thing. But I still didn't know what to name stuff. Just kind of pull some things out of the hat. What's my real convention for this? Do I have do you even have a process? They just kind of name things what I always named them or whatever. Right? So there's been sort of a mini advance in between some of these other things. And this is the rise of grid frameworks and these sorts of things, which, take it or leave it, have helped out in some regards. But I think that a lot of their approaches to adding in a lot of layout class stuff and things like this is really not ideal. Because if you build a site with one of these frameworks, these grid frameworks, like these older ones at least, you don't necessarily just want to crush down your website for a mobile device or something like that. You might want to completely change the way it works, and that you would have to rewrite all this stuff to do that, or change span 6 to not be a span 6 or something, which is really not ideal in either way. And so, though I think Twitter Bootstrap and 960 Grid and all those sorts of things are good things, but I think that with Sass and with this approach that we're going to talk about, I think it kind of blows that sort of stuff away. You don't have to do this sort of stuff anymore to get the same power. And this finally is just the fact that this GIF exists is proof of what I just said. Basically, because a lot of developers, I work with a lot of really talented developers, and this is how everybody feels about CSS in general. I mean, I don't feel this way very much anymore, but it's taken me about 10 years to not feel this way. And still sometimes it's like this. So we're gonna fix this problem, and that's what I hope to show you guys today. And so anyway, we'll start getting into the object-based systems here, and really across programming in general. When you take an object-oriented approach, you're trying to describe reality in code, and this is a pretty good principle just to think about whenever you're doing anything, especially when we were talking about naming. You're naming things that that are real things, or like what their function is or the purpose or something like that, not red box on the left side of whatever. And the web has, obviously progressed a ways from a page with links and some brochure images and stuff. Like we're building really complicated applications now, and we're really building things. We're building components of stuff that have all these purposes. And these are just a few examples. Here's a couple screenshots of some different stuff. These are just little components, little chunks of the web here and stuff. A lot of these are solutions to problems. Some are good, some are terrible, but like these are the things that we're building now. We're not just building one giant whatever. So one of the first approaches I want to talk about, is anybody familiar with atomic design? Here, a couple people. Good. Now this is just a conceptual abstraction, and I think it's probably one of the best metaphors that are out there amongst all the different approaches. And my deck, by the way, is up on my website, and it will have a whole bunch of resources for this stuff. And there's a lot more reading you should go do. It's good stuff. But basically, this approach breaks things down in this sort of molecule metaphor, and like atoms are basically almost just tags in the web. Like a label or something like that. There's something that serves a function, but it's not. It itself isn't. Can't really achieve anything. It may be like a form or something like that, but it doesn't really have any context. Something you can put any place. Links basically are essentially an atom. Like you can put a link anywhere you want, do anything you want with it. And then the molecule is kind of a collection of those elements. So if you have a label and a field and maybe some little component for validation or something like that, that would be what you consider a molecule. Some very core components that you can reuse no matter where. They kind of glom together to serve some sort of a larger purpose. And then in this sort of framework, you get up into organisms, and an organism, of course, would be a collection of molecules, which might be like your sign up. How you actually sign up for your website or whatever it happens to be. It could be a collection of these form pieces and invalidations and user experience chunks and stuff like that. And then there's a couple other things here. They have templates and pages, which I'm kind of just going to gloss over at this point because it's one of the areas that we don't find super useful necessarily. It's not that it's bad. It's just in our case, like we haven't put it into practice at least, that's for sure. But I don't really feel like it's necessary, which I'll get to in a little bit. But that, like I said, the link to this post about this stuff is here. Go read it. It's really good. And then the next strategy, if anybody's heard of BEM, or block element modifier, which Micah mentioned before, this is sort of the naming convention is kind of a cheap way to describe it. If you go to their website, there's like a naming convention, and then there's like a huge like novel of other stuff. It's about their implementations of it and all these things, which is great. But honestly, like the simplicity of the base aspects of it are what we really are concerned with. And their stated principles that you can have a big organization, you can do quick development, long-lived projects, scalable, and you can code reuse with this sort of approach. And their naming convention follows this sort of a paradigm here. And what they have is they'll have blocks, which are basically, they could be in the last slide, they could be organisms or they could be molecules necessarily. They're kind of like chunks of content. Blocks can be within blocks. So you might have a block that does like for entering password stuff, and that block might be inside of a login form or something, and that's a different block. And then the elements themselves are kind of their concept of atoms, like really tiny subcomponents that are not really, they can't just live on their own. And then the way they do the naming convention is they'll have a block name and then some sort of a separator and the element name. And this kind of keeps things separated a little bit. There's a couple different approaches. There's the double underscore and the double dash, so you can use dash case, and this is another style if you want to try that. There's no right way to do it. We use dash case because Cameron likes it. So here's some stuff from their website. A block might be considered a tab navigation. The tabs themselves could be considered elements of that. Like you don't just have a tab on a page. That's kind of silly. So, and then here you go. Here's a bunch of blocks working together to create a home page. In the previous example, this could be this could actually get into your templates and pages and that sort of stuff, layouts and that kind of. So there's another approach called SMAX. Has anybody heard of SMAX? Few people. Has anybody read the book? Yeah. So there's a book online that you should read also, and the links are here for this. This is kind of a combination of them and like a overall architecture for your files and like your code basically. And it's got a really great concept. They basically break down all of your CSS or Sass or whatever into these basic areas. So you have base, which is kind of like tags and maybe like variables or just really core stuff. You can put this into any project and you're going to be good to go. It's like your foundation for anything. Maybe like a normalizer is in here. Some people will use like Twitter Bootstrap. Something is like this is before we put one line of code down, this is our base for everything that we do. Like in our files, we include bourbon and whatever else. And then they have a layout category for creating components that control layouts. All of their objects are modules. They have states, which are basically, if you see over here, this is a module named callout, and their state is in this format, is something. They'll say it in a kind of an English phrase like that, like is collapsed or is invalid or something like that. And the states that go in this states file are like super global. They could apply to anything, any component or any aspect of your website could be collapsed. That's the idea with states. And then they also have a category for themes. And themes are like, well with Sass it's really great because you can key out all of your colors for like vendor-specific stuff, and put that into a theme. Say this is this is Chipotle theme for this application or something like that. Or maybe you want to change out some of those elements. So this is again their syntax here. Their layout stuff, they begin with a -L, which is kind of weird, but a couple other things that SMAX aims to do is they aim to minimize the depth of applicability, and all of these approaches do really. And the whole concept is that you don't have those big chained classes that are really specific, really brittle HTML sort of drills that go down into stuff. Basically, the idea is that like and this is something I resisted pretty heavily at first, was class naming like almost everything. And that's exaggerating, but you class name things that you need to control rather than targeting the HTML, because the HTML itself can change and be used in different ways. And it's like for instance, we'll have a scenario where we use a list to display a certain sort of thing, but then we use a different type of list or something, which is it's the same class name, that sort of thing. Basically, with the approach I'm going to pitch to you, I don't think I have a single selector that's more than probably 3 levels deep, and that most of those are like before and after pseudo-class stuff. So everything is really easy to target, and it kind of saves like the kind of spaghetti code aspect that develops over time. And then there's, I would mention performance. All of the data on this that I've looked into and stuff, it's when you have these really huge deep dive selectors, it does have an effect on performance if you know anything about the way like the browser streams content and then loops kind of back through things and stuff. But everything I've read, it's like, I mean, this is like worst case scenario, 50 milliseconds, which can make a big deal on like a mobile product or something, I guess, but it's not the hugest of concerns. But I figured I'd list it because, hey, it's a benefit of doing this, and it's worth it in some cases. So, and obviously organization. Now you have, with all kind of these systems, and SMAX specifically, you have a paradigm for laying out your files, where they're going to go, what you expect goes where, and all that sort of stuff. And so after reading all of that sort of stuff, I basically just determined that I kind of want all of this stuff. I want to design a URI, a UX or something like this, and then I want to be able to put it up in a header, or put it as a full page thing, or drop it someplace totally different, and be able to just kind of modify it and refactor it and polish the UI over time and keep going back to this and like, well, this selector's out of date, so I'm going to change how this works. And not have this big mess of like, well, I've got to go dig around and change it over here and over there, and it's called something else over here. I want that to be kind of encapsulated. And so There you go. That's what I want. And I'm going to quote myself there. Reusable, independent, and adaptable. Those are the kind of key things that you will gain from this sort of approach. So I kept digging around, and I was looking for somebody who had implemented this using Sass specifically. And I found this post by this guy named Ben Smith, I think. I think he's an Aussie. Pretty cool guy. We've talked a little bit on Twitter and stuff. I actually named my son after him after reading this post, which is not true at all. But my son's name is Ben. But he wrote this post, which I've included here. And if there's any internal link within this thing that you go read, you should go read this, because this kind of inspired me to kind of do what we've done. And we've seen huge gains from this approach. And so he really was kind of the instigator of this awesome system. And so what do we call it? We call it Smack Bems at Hello. No, we're not going to call it that. We're not going to call it anything, actually, at this point. I'm working on that. It might be a good naming convention for it, but it's not going to be a big thing like that. This is, so in our approach, a couple of things, the things that Ben ditched and I thought was a really wise idea, is that he basically said that everything was considered an object. Layouts, you know, there weren't really things besides your base and your states. They were not objects. So if you had a grid system, you built that as an object, and then you could put stuff into the grid system. And so, you know, we don't have a layouts section. We don't have a layouts naming convention. We just consider that a module within our stuff. And sometimes it's a module you're not going to reuse, very specific to the application you're doing. But there's really no necessary reason to not make it module, to make it something else. It just follows with this system, and it's very simple. And you won't see themes here either. We're starting to do that with some of our stuff, but I don't really feel like there's a huge need to break that into a separate section yet either. But this is a basic, you know, for one of our applications, some of the stuff you could have, it should be fairly obvious what's going on here. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, and so you can see things like container, which is, you know, that's just a core layout component. But I made it into a module so that, like, we have container, and we can do what we want with container there. It doesn't have a different naming convention. It's just obvious where it is. And this is what the sidebar of Sublime looks like, basically. And, you know, we have a little bit more in our base. We have, like, a variables folder. We have mixins and extends and a config. The config actually basically just loads all of this stuff. So that I only have to call, I think, was that in the last slide? Yeah. I call config, and config basically strings up all this stuff. And again, if you want to do themes, you could put a theme in here and have your config load up a different variable file, or however you want to solve that problem. And then the vast bulk of what we're building are modules or objects. And then we have sort of our states down here. And these are sort of the naming conventions that we use for a lot of stuff here, but I'm going to get into this a little bit deeper on the next page here. So this is the pattern that we use. And I really want this to stick in people's minds, so I have a little object lesson that goes with this. And this is my user challenge, right? This is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give my user beer, which is, you know, a common enough problem in most cases. And there's probably a million different ways to achieve this, but the first thing I like to do for my users when I give them beer is not just like pour a waterfall of beer in their face, or just anything like that. So the first object you're going to create is a cup, right? Because you need some sort of delivery vehicle for the beer. You could actually use a bottle too, which I have here, but let's just pretend that's not there. But you know, this is what I'm going to give the beer to the user in. And so I define a cup, and I just call it cup, and that's the module name. And then I create a file in modules called cup, CSS. And in here is all the stuff that defines a cup. Now, when I say all the things that defines it, except its layout, except its presentation. So its presentation, we find out, is done differently. But, you know, around my house, like, this is a cup, right? And this is not something I would choose to, well, I mean, unless I really didn't want the person to come back or something, to serve a guest or a user beer with. And so, where did I put this? Oh, here we go. So obviously, I want to modify a cup, and I want to say that it's a glass. And I want to, this isn't the element where Sass comes in and basically blows away and dominates in the face everything else there is. Because you can define a cup generally, and then you can say, I want a cup that is a glass. And then you can extend cup and then say transparency 100%, or whatever it happens to be with the glass, right? And that's great because you don't have to repeat yourself. This is like all laid out in cup. So we have a general like sort of base class that's our object. We have a modifier. And I use this double dash thing to modify stuff. I'll have a base object name, and then we'll have the sort of extension that changes it. You could have a keg, or you could have, you know, whatever it happens to be. So here's a glass. Now, we want to put the beer in the glass, right? And that gets a little bit tricky in an object-oriented system because you don't want beer to have a layout, and you don't necessarily want glass to have a layout because glasses can be sitting on a table, they can be broken, they can be whatever it happens to be. So you're trying to keep these two objects separated. And so there's a sort of nomenclature we've adopted like this, where you will say what the object is, and then you'll say what its child object is. And you create this wrapper basically here. And this goes in the parent modules folder. Kind of usually I put it down at the base of the file. Say that cup glass is going to modify beer to be presented in a certain way. And you know, that's what it'll look like. It'll have a head of whatever, and it'll be about a pint, or whatever that is. This is dark. I wonder if the should have got a lighter beard. But anyway, so here we go. You know, the next step is to put the actual beer in there. So beer is a totally separate object. Beer can be in a lake. It can be wherever you want. But beer is laid out by cup, glass in this case. I'm saying that my glass does specific things to beer. It shapes it like this. It has a nice gigantic, I put this out here, nice gigantic head on it because I poured it directly straight in there, real fast. And then my beer object can just have properties of beer. And now, in this case, like beer, maybe I'd modify it and say this is Jubal Ale or an IPA or whatever it happens to be. But that would all be in the beer module, which we've created a whole new one here. So this is the kind of basic core pattern. And the next thing that you deal with is states. And states are like modifiers that you use a lot of times with JavaScript just to switch the classes, but then you can do, let's see if this actually works. It's pretty dark, so you may not be able to see.
The word part.
Yeah, it should be kind of becoming darker, actually. It's actually green. I don't know if you can really see that super well, but I put some, rat killer in there or whatever. But basically, a state is something that modifies a module, and it's like I said before. This is kind of the SMAX principle. It's written in like is in this state, and so like when you are looking through and digging through HTML, or you're looking at the DOM trying to fix something, you can tell what's going on here. The beer has been poisoned, or like the password field is invalid, or whatever it happens to be. You know, you have these very logical sort of things, and there's not a huge chain of classes here. There's not like 50 classes on any of these things, which you kind of like, well, what does all this stuff do? You know, like it's just one sort of thing, and we've modified it here. And that's not the only approach there is, but this has worked for us really well. And when you look through your HTML, it's very clear what's going on here. This is determining the layout for beer. This is a beer, it's poison, and this is a cup, which is a glass also. And if I needed to go change the styles for this stuff, it's not like you have to go do a big word find to figure out where that is. You just go, look, the cup is over here. The beer is over here. And then if I want to figure out what the state is doing, or change how that property works, is here. And you can put your your CSS transitions in this stuff or on the objects themselves, and so they can do all kinds of cool stuff if you do state things. So so that is our basic pattern for what we code, day in and day out.
That was poison.
Well, yeah. Only live once, right? Now, so now let's dig into a little bit more, like a specific example, not some abstract dorky beer thing. This is an object that we've created. Now, does anyone not know what's going on here? Or just have a wild guess of what this is? I didn't think so. I mean, this is pretty darn straightforward. We have a toggle that is a switch. There might be a different type of toggle, that doesn't look like a switch or whatever it happens to be. But in this case, I have a toggle that is a switch, and it's on. The end. That's, whoa, that's really difficult to figure out what's going on here. Maybe this could also be off. This is just some of the components beneath that. And typically, and I didn't actually name this one rightly, but I'll include the module name followed by whatever the subcomponent is. So like toggle label, at worst case scenario, I have to target the switch and then target toggle label. You've done 2 levels or something. That's like the worst case. But usually, this is unique enough that it's not really used elsewhere. And if you're going to use something that starts with toggle, it's probably going to be in the toggle file. And then here's like another variation of this that we used in a different UI scenario, but it was the same basic core component. We had, instead of, I'll show you what this looks like in a second, but instead of a switch that, you're doing this is on, this is off, we had people picking between sort of binary options, right? And it didn't make sense to have a switch in that case, because it was like, you'd only see one of the options, and then it'd be a mystery, like, I clicked it, what does this do? Oh, now it's off, now it's, so we made this other one that's like sort of a toggle button, and it's basically, it's either left or right. And in that case, you don't need the switch. This is what the actual module looks like. We've got a couple different variations here, and this is the button one down here. Now, this code, I put up in CodePin and put on the website too, and feel free to take this down and ridicule it and fork it and do whatever you want to do, but this has sort of a basic like overview of our entire approach in this one coding example. And this actually functions. I wrote some really, really ghetto JavaScript just to make this function, but the transitions are CSS and there's some cool stuff going on there. So anyway, so that's that there. And at this stage, I want to mention this because this is really important. If you extend outside of a module, if you're creating these objects and then you use Sass's extend, but you extend to something else, that's going to break your system at some point because you don't really have objects that can live on their own. They always are requiring other things. And so that's just a word to the wise. At first I wasn't really thinking about that and just kind of was writing stuff and like, I changed some of the stuff and I was like, this doesn't work anymore, and there it was. Go ahead.
You specifically had a file you included early on called extends.
That's right.
In your base, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. That's technically outside of any of the modules that came after
right.
it. I'm assuming those modules would be looking inside of that for awesome things they could extend.
That's right. And that's the exception to this in this case. And those extends, usually what we'll build in there are things that are really, usually I'll use silent classes, so they're not even rendered until they're called. But they are like really kind of core components we use all the time, like a panel or something like that. But I don't really have panels in my site. I just want to use panel.
Well, we can ensure that those extends don't break the individual of our modules because they're in the base stuff, and since the base is always included, you don't have to worry about missing a module.
You have a module just randomly depending on another module sitting right next to it.
Yeah.
This is part of that base thing that's at the
that's what your extends. This is exactly the thing. That's in your base components, which you're kind of like, it's basically your framework, your own in-house framework that you're kind of always constantly developing. And so if you make a change in there, it's going to affect everything, and so it's usually a big deal. So those are pretty. That file, honestly, I think only has like 3 or 4 things in it or something at this point. But at one point, I had a Twitter Bootstrap thing where I was like silent classing a bunch of Twitter Bootstrap stuff, so that you could use Twitter Bootstrap, but you'd only use it if you called it, and then there was no adding classes to stuff and all that. But whatever, like when you get into this sort of a system, you don't really need that stuff quite as much. Great for prototyping, getting things off the ground, and good foundation for stuff. But when you start developing these objects, like we've done like 3 or 4 apps now, maybe 3.
Yeah, well, we've done 3 apps, and then it's now being used in our other .NET stuff. So
exactly, and like we're using a lot of the same stuff over. I have a buttons module that I just pull into everything, and then I've kind of like enhanced it as we've gone along and made more modifications and more cases we've needed for stuff. and then I kind of go back and push it into the other projects. And
We should make a gem.
yeah, well, yeah, we're either that or use Bourbon or something. We're talking about maybe doing that, wrapping these components into some sort of thing we can just kind of pull in and do that sort of stuff. So enough of that pop biscuit thing. so you might be able to see it.
It's blue.
It's blue-green. It is. So this is there's two different approaches if you've read about this stuff to how to do this. You can have the sort of Twitter Bootstrap approach where you have like you might have like nav bar inverted, nav bar or something like you have this chain of classes. And I use this sort of blend. I use a multi-class paradigm here, but it's usually only two. It's usually the object itself, and then I meant to mention this is a state that
I like it.
I don't think he's ever seen a laser pointer before.
Yeah. So these are module-specific states, and I meant to. That's the title, and I meant to mention that. But there are times when you build an object, and the object itself has specific states in it that are not global. They don't apply to your entire website. They don't go in states. And that's a lot of times like with the toggle example, is left or right. Those are hard things to like generalize to your entire website. My website's left. What does that mean? Like, okay. So what I'll do is I will always do this, so that I don't have is dropping the base is never like out there hanging that can be selected by something and blow up my website, my application, whatever. It's always using this and selector. So it's for these things too. Like when you name them, they're sorry. When you name them, they're usually it's usually implicit that they relate to the module itself too. So it's not usually like is this a global state or not? But it's really you have two places to look. You're looking in either your global states or you're looking in the module itself, and you see the states there. And these just kind of work like modifiers, or they're more JavaScript, kind of verb-based type things. Verb, right? Verb, here's another cool thing you can do, and I missed one here. But is if you are really going to make these independent, having a giant vars folder, variables like at the head of your base folder is great. But if you make use of these variables, and then you pull these modules in somewhere else, and those variables don't exist, it's going to, Sass is going to spit out errors. It doesn't exist. It's not defined. So you can use these default things in here. And I went through and did this. I haven't seen a huge gain from necessity to do this because I usually know what I'm doing pretty well. But in thinking like I'm going to hand this off to somebody else, they try to use it, and it's like, what is color? These are from our official color palette, so they're numbered. But I don't know what this is or what it's supposed to be or something like that. So if you do this, if you know how this works in Sass, it's pretty straightforward. This is the default value unless it's called somewhere else. It's defined elsewhere. And you just put this bang default here. And that keeps errors down, keeps stuff independent. If you, for some reason, change your global variables folder, this module is not going to break. It's still going to have sort of a base.
So these variables are the top of your module?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does that mean these are overrides, or these are
defaults.
overridden by
These are the defaults. If you put default in Sass, what it means is like this is the value until this variable is established anywhere else. So the variables folder just has this equals whatever the color is, and so it'll take precedence over default. Anytime it sees default, it looks for like another declaration of it and says, oh, that's the one that's not default. So.
Yeah.
These could be like a general design. Usually I just have whatever I happen to be currently using, I'll just plop them in here so that things won't break. They look about right, And you can get an idea, too, of what these are supposed to be as you're looking through the module, too. Like, well, border panel something is kind of crazy. And one thing you'll notice, too, is that even in my naming for variables, like I sort of follow the same convention that we're doing with the object-oriented approach. Usually I'll start with like the most base property and then work downwards and then get more general, like border radius for panels, not for whatever, So that kind of thing, just some kind of cool stuff that you start like developing as you use this sort of system. This is from the you'll see this in the toggle module that's up online, And this is basically the thing that sets up the toggle and does its presentation. It does a little bit more than that because I just structured it really simply in that thing. But basically, if you go in here, what I do when I build modules is I build them as either inline or block elements in like full width. Like they don't, they can be expanded and contracted, and they can be fluid and work that way. So they can go into any scenario. They can kind of, in general, still work. And so that leaves me the ability to have like my container say, well, this toggle is now 150 pixels wide, or I can really directly target it and change certain aspects of it. And this is only going to happen. This is in the container file, and it's only going to happen when a toggle is in a container. And actually, in the real file, this is called space. So the toggle's in space, and space says you're going to be like this and do this stuff. So that's the kind of like parent-child thing. And like this extra div, you can debate whether that's a really great idea. I mean, you could actually add this selector onto the thing itself and use some CSS to do that. I tend to use these. I don't, always use them, but I use them when needed. Is kind of a good principle. Like if you need to change the layout of a thing, then I put the bit in there that tells this is the context. So you're not just necessarily having to create huge quantities of extra divs and all this sort of stuff by default, which there's not a huge negative to that anyway. But either way, it's like cleaner, So this is kind of a thing that like as you get to use this process, you start making decisions about this stuff. And like better and better decisions as you go. Like early on, it was just like every time I created something, I wrapped it, and there was like just wrap, like all these things in here. And it was like, I don't need that. It doesn't do anything. I don't need to call those things. The parent of this is, it doesn't really matter. So that's just something to look out for. You'll kind of develop your own happy medium with this as you go along. So let's review the things we started out with. This has been solved by this problem. Like if I create a login, I can then extend the login and say login that's like drop down or something like that. And now this has a different sort of a scenario or whatever it happens to be. I don't have to go back to that thing and like rip it all apart and totally rewrite it. I can just extend it and modify it. And then all the states are there and all that sort of stuff. It's great. Design consistency, we've hit this one pretty good because we reuse the modules, we kind of gradually hint and tweak at them as we get better definitions, or like maybe like an app, it just really needs to be a little bit different in this scenario, we'll make those tweaks. But there's really, most of the objects that I've really thought about and built and worked on, I end up not changing. I just include, boom, good to go, And this is much better, much better. You still, you're still sometimes like, yeah, I don't know, products, this thing or something, but in general, I think about what am I trying to achieve here? What is the user, what's the user experience direction on this? Like, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? I'm trying to get the user to log in or whatever like that. That's a, good start at least. And it should be obvious like what it is. It shouldn't just be a name. It's like, this is what the purpose of this object is. It's a to-do list. It's a, it's a navigation thing. It's something like that. So that's gone. This has gone way down. This doesn't hardly. I don't think this happens at all. I mean, the only conflicts we've had has been with old, rusty Bootstrap stuff that we're kind of replacing. To be honest, most of the classes, like I said, I don't have a selector. I almost never have a selector that's more than 2 deep, and because they're specific to what their purpose is, And so that's a really kind of cool game there. This also, Lauren works with me. A lot of people work with me, and I'm writing this code, and it should be. It's not perfect. You would contest, I'm sure. But like it's fairly obvious what the purpose of these things is, and what they're supposed to do. And if you want to change them, it's not like a big like, oh man, I got to go to line 500,000 of it, whatever. It's just go to that file and sort of modify it, maybe extend it or change it or whatever it happens to be. This, like I was just saying, in refactoring, has been a huge gain. Like in the past, like I said, I've been doing this for a long time, and there's either never been time for this or not a good way to do it. To like go in and look at my toggle and being like, that is a stupid way to make a toggle. I'm going to do this different. You know, like this is way too complicated or whatever. You know, like going in and reworking these elements is great because you can focus on, does it achieve its job? Does this make sense to the user in this scenario? Or do I need to modify it or whatever it happens to be? Or like, you know, new stuff comes out, you know, a new way of doing things or something like that. You can refactor these elements. You don't have to just kind of take it or leave it. The whole application's flown forever, you know. And then this for me is a pretty core thing. It allows me to, again, like breaking these things down into manageable chunks and whatnot. It's very easy to focus on what I'm trying to achieve in these little components, and then how those components work in a larger scale, and that sort of thing. So basically, like how are we doing it? Do people have some interesting questions or anything like at this stage yet? Go ahead.
Okay, so talk to me about non-optimum markup. Let's pretend you don't have total control over your HTML.
Yeah.
Pretend you work in any kind of framework that isn't just HTML. And you know, there's a lot of sort of techniques out there. You know, you almost declare this sort of like perfect example class, like a silent thing, and then you extend it to like your really nasty, you know, Drupal views dash content inner outer. What do you recommend there? What's your approach?
There's probably a couple of decent ways to achieve that. If you don't have a way to at least begin to name things, that's pretty difficult. But it doesn't mean you can't do it. I suppose if you have things that already exist, what we've done with some kind of complicated Bootstrap components is like brought them in to something and then modified them there. And then like, okay, it's really great if you have Sass for all your stuff because you can like extend it just like that.
Yeah.
Like we had a Bootstrap Sass for a while, and we could just anything we wanted to be like, well, that's cool, but I don't want it to do that, so I'm going to take it and take control and just do something else. And we would just like create our own module. Like the first statement would be extends Twitter Bootstrap. I'd put a comment like blah blah blah, it relies on this, and don't do that. You know, like so that's one approach. You know, I haven't had to deal with that actually, honestly, a great deal in our scenario, so we haven't really come up with a strategy.
You're very lucky.
Yeah. I know, it's a blessing, you know, right? But that is a legitimate concern and a difficulty with any of these sort of technologies. So, no, I don't really have a super great answer for you necessarily. But I would do whatever I could to try to implement the system, even if it was a bear to kind of do it, you know. So, and call Drupal and be like, rewrite your system, and this will save everyone's life forever.
Put a patch
right?
in.
Put a pull request, whatever it is, So, good question.
Yeah, hell of a patch.
Right. Yeah. So let me run through a couple like cool benefits of this. Like, that kind of already talked about a bit. Think about functional objects, smaller, more focused pieces of code. This is basically the same as the last slide. But you know, like navigation bar is collapsed. It's not a mystery. This is where that is. This is where the state is. It's not hard to figure things out. These are the keys to kind of achieving this thing. You learn the architectures, read the articles. They're really good. And even if you don't put it in practice right away, it's like, well, gee, that's pretty rad. Maybe like if I build a new project, I'll totally do this because it's, I mean, I'm not going to say this is the only way to do it, but it's awesome. It's an awesome way to do it. Like, we've had huge gains from this. And learn this pattern. You don't have to use our hybrid approach, but this is the stuff that has worked. Everything we have is it's very simple. It's not a big mess.
I still don't get that middle class. I get module, I get child,
I'm right
I
there
don't
with
get
you.
module child.
Yeah, this is the component that came up. Most people had a bit of a, you know, like what is the point of that, right? You know, like this is basically, if you use this right, then you don't need layout classes necessarily. This is a layout component. It's basically, if you have an object here that is completely independent, like the toggle or whatever, you have another object that's like a sidebar of toggles or whatever it happens to be, right? The sidebar defines how the toggles are going to be presented in itself, if that makes any sense. Like, toggles could be elsewhere. They could be in a totally different way of being presented in this website. They could be like, you know, positioned absolute on something or whatever. But it's the parent object that describes how a child object is going to be basically presented in that scenario. Like I said, it's kind of optional. Like it's good to put in there.
It's one of the benefits that you're not adding a bunch of specificity on by saying dot sidebar space dot thingy. It's one class, so there you're not adding that extra little bit. It's more overridable later in a way.
Yeah, that's true as well. And it's also another kind of cool thing about this is, like I said, it's organized. You can tell like what is defining the layout of this element. You'll see this in here, and you'll see like, well, it's floating over here or something like that. But its parent is telling it to float over here. So you can go into the parent module, and you'll see like one line at the bottom, like, you know, space underscore toggle is telling it to do this, and you can just change it there. And like, it just kind of separates the concerns of the objects themselves a little bit. It's a weird concept. Like this at first, like I was like really like, I don't know about that. You know, like it just didn't seem like anything I would do. Typically, I wouldn't put in extra HTML.
Doesn't that kind of break the scoping though? Like you were saying that all the stuff related to toggle is in the toggle module.
Yeah.
Except you have to go to the sidebar module to find out how to lay out the toggle in the sidebar.
Right. Well, it like the toggle. What's a good way to describe this? It's basically there to set like sort of a context for what you're trying to do, right? If this was my logout or login module or something like that, right? I built this form that can scale like however I want it, right? You know, but then I want to put it in the nav bar. Well, the nav bar is what's going to tell the login to come down over the top of the web page where you can do stuff and then go away, because the what is setting its layout is its parent. Like you don't have to go in and change logout or log in. You know, like how that's presented, because it's just a very general sort of thing. It's basic, and this just exists to try to make things more independent and reusable. It's not ideal. I mean, this is something we strive for all the time, right? But it's really, you got to be far thinking to like guess exactly how every scenario is going to work. But you know, I get what you're saying. It's kind of like, well, what, you know, that was one of the weirder components to me. But
the way that I kind of see it is that like the box is what defines how the objects inside it fit inside it. Then I wouldn't want to, like, for the login logout thing, I wouldn't want to have to add a new thing to log out every time I want to put it in a different box.
Yeah. Like in the end, like your system of objects, they do kind of relate. You know, like you have blocks within blocks, and there's no designer that I've met, I mean, maybe they're out there, can design things to work in every scenario once and be done with it, right? You know, like that would be great, but a lot of times you want to just kind of change the way like something works, and you don't have to go into the log out or log in bit itself and change it. You can give it some context and change it that way. And you know, you could just attach this to the object and use a selected method that way. Right? You know, where you put that is still, you know, you put it in the parent or whatever. You know, it's not like hard and fast. You do what you want, but this has worked.
I think
out
that's what
pretty
I'm
well.
getting hung up on.
Yeah.
Expert data.
Yeah, and you don't have to do it, like I said. Like some great comments on an article I wrote on this. Like this is one of the major things that people were like, well, could you also do this? Yeah. But you know, put a couple classes on there. The only reason I don't do that is just for the nicety of a selector that doesn't have like a huge amount of classes. I just try to keep.
Well, it seems like it's a game of whack-a-mole.
Right. Yeah. But then you have
reduce your selectors, but
yeah.
increase your markup.
Exactly. Which is also like not ideal. So there you go. You know, iterate, pause, blah blah blah. These are the two things to watch out for when you're doing this. Like I said before, extends and overthinking this. Like when I first did this, like I said, I was putting this stuff everywhere and like, oh man, this is gonna work for 100 years, or you know, like it's gonna be so easy to use. And like, you don't need to do that. Like, just kind of as you use this sort of approach, you find like sort of a happy medium. Like a lot of things. What typically happens is I'll start building a module and it'll start to get more and more complex. And I'm like, you know what? This chunk of this, I'm gonna break out. This serves a slightly different purpose, you know. And it may not be reusable necessarily, but I'm going to break this out of this and pull it into something else so I can keep this like a little more focused, you know. And that just happens over time. The nice thing is that all of our library of files, there's not one CSS file that's like, you know, 500 lines and like, whoa, this is getting way out of hand.
500 is short.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man, I honestly don't think we have a couple that are even a few hundred lines. You know, like they're all really pretty small and focused, which is great. Nice. And Sass handles all of that. It's compiled in your dev environment or whatever, however you do it, and so like it's not, you know, there's no like performance weirdness with that. Like I said, before we go into more questions and stuff, this module is up here for anybody to go and
I posted on Twitter and
Cool.
it's in the event and all that.
yeah, cool. And go nuts, do whatever you want, like ask questions. I love to hear this sort of stuff and come up with better approaches. Maybe there's a way better way to do that. I don't know. It probably is. So that's, you know, this is the Christmas section of this. I have some gifts for you. That's one. There's a Sublime snippet that if you want to just create this thing, you can just type module tab, boom. It will like frame all that stuff out, the pattern that we just talked about. I use that a fair amount when I'm just sort of like beginning to structure stuff. It's very simple. If you use Emmet, you don't really need that, but whatever. And then there's tons of resources I've included here, again. And these will all be online. You can go read about it. And really cool stuff. And I want to see more people talk about this stuff and like kind of push this, because I think this system of this way of thinking about things is kind of like one of the next bigger kind of awesome things in web development. And so definitely, you know, hit me up online and stuff like that. I'd love to hear people's feedback or, you know, or like questions like that. And if you have any more questions, shoot away. So. All right, thanks.
Cool.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for hearing me.
Oh, nice timing.
Oh, seriously, timed that. That was awesome.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we got this spread here in like 5 minutes or so. Wow. They're sitting down, the room just filled up. That's not much, one of as many people. We'd like to give opportunities during these meetups for people that are part of organizations that are hiring to give a chance to shout out the positions that are available. So is there anyone here that has open positions? We got a bunch. All right, let's start front to back.
So my company's in a little bit of a transition right now, and we'll go into details here a little bit later. But suffice it to say, we're looking for about 10 people over the next 6 months in front end and specifically Drupal. So
And if you need Drupal training, there's that Drupalize
speaking of Drupal training, there's the little bots up there. So we are looking for talented developers, JavaScript, PHP, Drupal.
Cool.
Yeah, our company's been growing, and we always have a need for people if you're doing freelance and whatever, and want to pick up some overflow work. Hey, maybe you're short on your freelance stuff this month. You want to do a, website cut up or a design or whatever.
And what's the company?
Vice Interactive Group. They're out of Dallas, telecommute friendly. So
Very nice. Cool. And we have a few more.
This is my boss, by the way.
Incom Digital Solutions, formerly Give Tango. We're a bank building. We're hiring 15 people right now. QA, JavaScript, .NET, and project management.
All right, let's keep going. Chrissy, got it?
Winter time. Yeah, that's choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some of you probably know Alan, or work with Alan. We're at Toast Spark. It's a startup that's growing pretty well. We need some talented front-end people, preferably at this more senior level. We're building kind of intensive applications. Maybe some designers, and we're always looking for Java developers.
Did you say Java?
Java.
Java. Okay, all right.
That's like JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
And I would just tack onto that. We're building really cool stuff with Ember and Foundation, and I'm doing UX. And I'm also looking for more UX type people. So.
Yeah, I'll say that we have a kind of crazy situation because we have .NET, and then we're also doing Angular, and we're using front-end Bower and a lot of kind of like cutting-edge tools as well. We're trying to like kind of integrate those things together. I think we've been fairly successful actually. It's pretty rad. I mean, there's nothing out there on the web like how do you do this? nothing. Google never says nothing. So,
If anybody else uses AngularJS, his concept of modules correspond pretty much one-to-one with AngularJS directives. So you can write a directive and have it link automatically to the modules that Andrew creates for me. Boom.
Sweet. I missed a few of them. So did we get through everyone? Is there anything else?
Puppet also is hiring front enders.
It's a good time to be in this industry.
yeah, man, we picked it right. Roll that one.
If people are needing jobs, then you're at the right place. And if you need a job and you're not here, you're in the wrong place. So cool. So pizza's here, so we're going to do that real quick. Just a little bit. We are definitely meeting next month. Second week of the month is perfect. It's like miss all the big holidays and all that kind of good stuff. So we'll be on January 14th. Is that right? You want a calendar map? Second Thursday, whatever that Thursday is. All right. And we're looking for some presenters. I'm thinking of doing like a Sass 3.3 focus sometime, maybe February-ish.
It's the 9th.
It's a 9th?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. Somebody said it's the 14th. All right.
January.
January 9th. So we'll be back here, hopefully back over there. But if anyone's interested in giving a talk like this, awesome, or a 5, 10, 15-minute talk, just hit me up on Twitter or just here or whatever. And
I want to talk about the 6 meg CSS file. The story of the 6 meg CSS file. It's like a 5-minute talk. It's easy.
All right. Okay, cool. Well, we got one, so we need a couple more.
Is it a horror story?
Yeah,
It's a horror story. Yeah.
Nice.
Flashlight.
Yeah, I think horror
Like
that might be a really good
idea.
idea sometimes. Yeah, if you have any thoughts for Sass 3.3, if you've been using it, maybe February we'll shoot for that. And just give a bunch of like mini presentations of like the different new stuff coming up with that. So other than that, anyone else have any questions, thoughts, haikus, jokes? No? Awesome, cool. Eat food. I'll stop recording.
Yeah, you